The terrifying crime of the O'Connell house. A deadly curse on a 25-year cycle. Dr. Fitzwilliam, who had been dozing in an armchair by the fireplace, rushed to the bedside, but it was too late. His heart has stopped, the old doctor declared, his voice tinged with astonishment. I have never witnessed anything like it. It's as if an invisible hand squeezed it until it shattered. He closed Seamus's eyelids, using no small amount of force to overcome the rigidity on the dead man's face. I am deeply sorry, Mr. O'Connell, he said to Liam. I wish I could explain this, but medicine has its limits. He had immersed himself in the library, ordering ancient books from Dublin, Edinburgh, and even rare manuscripts from distant monasteries on the continent, paying enormous sums for texts that most scholars had never even heard of. His correspondence was no longer limited to academic circles, but also reached out to folklorists, self-proclaimed druids, and even those who claimed they could hear whispers from the fairy mounds. The servants began to whisper that young Master Seamus was following in his brother's footsteps of madness, and even Liam expressed his concern to their father about the grim O'Connell curse. All the men died, screaming the same name. The story I am about to tell you is pieced together from family journals, historical records, and the accounts of those who witnessed the terrible power of the curse. For nearly 2 centuries, the men of this once mighty clan met their end in a bizarre, horrific manner that defied all logical explanation. Each man died screaming the same name, a name that seemed to have no connection to their lives, a name that seemed to rise from the oldest and darkest of legends. And as we shall see, this is not just a tale of supernatural horror, but also a story of historical injustice, familial sin, and the price of truths buried beneath the green hills of Ireland. Our story begins in the spring of 1810 inches, the lush countryside of County Meath, Ireland. Glenmore Castle, an ancient stone fortress, stood majestically on the rolling hills near the sacred hill of Tara. The O'Connell family's fortune was built on the whiskey trade, and their name was renowned throughout the region. Their distilleries provided employment for hundreds of locals. Their generosity was praised by the parish priests, and the O'Connell bloodline was considered one of the oldest noble lineages. The castle itself was a testament to their prosperity, with its time-weathered stone walls, proud towers, and a great iron gate that opened onto a gravel path leading to the inner courtyard. Declan O'Connell, the patriarch, had 3 sons. Liam, the eldest and heir, managed the whiskey business. Seamus, the second son, was a poet with a passion for Irish folklore, and Cillian, the youngest, was a free spirit with a love for nature and botany. Declan was a domineering man, a widower hardened by the burden of maintaining the family's reputation. His wife had died giving birth to Cillian, leaving Declan to raise his sons alone, a task he undertook with the same iron discipline he used to run his distilleries. As a result, the 3 O'Connell brothers grew into vastly different men, each seeking their father's approval in their own way. Liam threw himself into the business with precision and pragmatism. Seamus sought glory through his verses, while Cillian sought to uncover the secrets of nature, hoping one day his father would see value in pursuits beyond the realm of profit. It was Cillian who first encountered the harbinger of his family's downfall. On a clear spring equinox afternoon, as the first buds were beginning to bloom, Cillian ventured deep into the family estate, toward an ancient mound the locals called the Fairy Mound. The place was rarely visited, a wild patch where the manicured fields of Glenmore gave way to ancient oaks and moss-covered stones. Villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, believing it to be a gateway to the world of ancient spirits, a place where the veil between realms grew thin. Cillian, with his naturalist soul, found these stories more fascinating than frightening. While searching for rare plants near the Fairy Mound, his gaze fell upon a small stone slab, hidden beneath the massive roots of an ancient oak. The mound itself was ancient, older than Glenmore Castle, perhaps even predating the arrival of St. Patrick in Ireland. The stone was only partially visible, as earth and roots had encroached upon it over the centuries. The symbol that caught Cillian's eye was carved deep into the stone's face. It was unlike any Ogham script or Celtic symbol he had ever seen. It was a collection of concentric spirals intersecting with sharp, straight lines, all combining to form the haunting image of a wide-open eye. The spirals seemed to have been carved with a sophisticated technique, far beyond the crude tools of antiquity. But the strangest thing was how the symbol seemed to swallow the evening light rather than reflect it, creating an illusion of infinite depth on the stone's flat surface. Cillian felt an irresistible urge, and as his fingers gently traced the carving, a sudden, cold wind swept past, like a breath of winter on his neck in the midst of a warm spring day. Fascinated, Cillian carefully copied the symbol into his field journal, unwittingly binding his family to a curse darker than death itself. As he drew, the clear sky suddenly darkened, and a strange silence fell over the woods. The cheerful chirping of birds ceased. The spring breeze died down. Cillian found himself working with a growing urgency, as if compelled by some unseen force. When he finished the last stroke, he felt a fleeting wave of dizziness, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Looking up, he was stunned to realize that dusk had fallen, though he felt he had only been sitting there for an hour. That evening, as the family dined in the great hall of Glenmore Castle, Cillian shared his drawing with his brother Seamus, who shared his passion for ancient legends and history. The hall was lit by dozens of candles in wrought iron sconces, their flames dancing on the long oak table where the O'Connells gathered. The walls were hung with embroidered tapestries and ancient claymores, relics of ancestors silently watching over their descendants. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth, where a large pair of antlers, a trophy from one of Declan's hunts, was mounted prominently on the mantel. Seamus's face went pale as he stared at the drawing. The candlelight seemed to dim around him as he held the page, and an oak log in the fireplace split with a sharp crack, startling the servant girls. Seamus was a slender 7-year-old, with wavy black hair and deep, dreamy eyes that reflected his poetic soul. Unlike his brothers, he had inherited his mother's pensive features, high cheekbones, lips often pursed in thought, and a gaze that seemed to see past the immediate reality. "Where did you find this, Cillian?" he asked, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. His hand trembled slightly as he held the journal, and the others at the table, Liam and Declan, looked up from their meal, sensing the unusual tension. "On the fairy mound, near the base of the old oak," Cillian replied, surprised by his brother's reaction. Cillian, just 21, was the most vibrant of the brothers, with perpetually tousled light brown hair and bright blue eyes that always sparkled with curiosity. "Do you recognize it?" Seamus hesitated before answering. I've read of similar markings in some of the old legends." He glanced warily at his father, who had now turned his full attention to their conversation. "They are said to be the mark of another world, a language used to communicate with beings we are not meant to know." The poet's voice grew deeper. "These marks are believed to be a kind of seal, places where the veil between our world and the other side is thinnest." Liam, the 30-year-old eldest brother, snorted with contempt. He was the one who most resembled their father, broad, shouldered, practical, with a square, determined jaw and eyes that were always calculating the value of a cask of whiskey. "Oh, come now, Seamus. You're lost in your foolish fairy tales again. Next you'll be telling us that fae folk dance on the mound every full moon." Declan O'Connell, overhearing the argument, dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "It's all peasant superstition," he declared, refilling his glass of wine. The patriarch was in his 50s, his once powerful frame beginning to grow heavy with age, but his voice still carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His graying hair was neatly combed, but his thick eyebrows were still jet black, giving him a perpetually skeptical expression. "That mound is nothing more than an old tomb for some long-forgotten kings. It's nothing for us to concern ourselves with." If only he had known how wrong he was. That night, as the castle slept, a cold, unseasonable rain swept in from the west. The wind howled through the turrets of Glenmore Castle, and the rain lashed against the glass panes with a mournful sound. In Cillian's room, the pages of his journal flipped back and forth as if turned by an unseen hand, though the window was securely latched. The drawing of the symbol seemed to emit a faint, pale green glow, visible only in the pitch-black darkness between claps of thunder. 5 days later, Cillian did not come down for breakfast. The family initially assumed he had risen at dawn to search for rare plants after the rain, a habit that often earned him teasing from Liam and a reprimand from Declan, who considered wandering in the woods a frivolous waste of time. But when the sun reached its zenith and there was still no sign of the youngest O'Connell, concern began to mount. His bed was still neatly made, untouched. His hiking boots were still in the corner. His cloak still hung on its peg, indicating he had not left the castle in the usual way. And most chillingly, His field journal lay open on his desk. The mysterious symbol now filled an entire page, drawn over and over again with strokes that grew increasingly chaotic and frantic. The final drawing was pressed so hard it had torn the paper, and the pencil lay broken beside it, its tip worn down, and its wooden body splintered as if squeezed by an extraordinary force. A search party was formed, and after hours of combing the estate, they found him atop the fairy mound, lying motionless beside the ancient stone. The day had turned strangely cold, and a thick fog clung to the oak trees, muffling the calls of the searchers. It was Liam who first spotted his brother's crumpled form, a patch of mossy green against the damp earth. At first, they thought he was dead, but as they drew near, Cillian's eyes suddenly flew open, wide with a terror that seemed to gaze upon something not of this world. His body began to convulse violently, his back arching unnaturally, as if an unseen force were trying to snap his spine. His once neat clothes were now caked in mud and torn, as if he had been dragged through the forest. His fingers were bloody and caked with dirt, his nails broken from clawing futilely at the stone bearing the ancient symbol. He opened his mouth, and a primal, agonizing scream echoed forth, so horrifying that several of the servants in the search party fled in terror. The sound seemed to carry a frequency a human throat could not possibly produce. It was layered, echoing, as if multiple voices were screaming from a single throat. The crows in the oaks took flight in a black cloud. The hounds in the castle kennels began to howl mournfully, and even the horses in the stables whinnied in panic, kicking at their stalls. "Brigid!" he screamed, the name tearing from his throat like a living thing seeking escape. His eyes, once a bright blue, had turned a milky white as if filmed over in an instant. "Brigid! Brigid!" He shrieked the name over and over, his voice growing hoarser, until, with a final, desperate cry, Cillian O'Connell fell silent forever. As Cillian's last scream faded, a frigid gust of wind swept across the fairy mound, and in that moment, several of the servants would later swear they saw the fleeting shape of a woman in a white cloak standing by the ancient oak, a translucent figure in archaic dress, who vanished into the mist the instant they tried to get a better look. The O'Connell family was plunged into grief. Cillian was laid to rest in the family crypt, an old grey stone structure beside the castle's small chapel. The funeral was attended by the most prominent families in the region, all come to offer condolences to the O'Connells, but also unable to hide their curiosity about the young man's mysterious death. The rumors had already begun, whispers of madness, of spirits on the fairy mound, of a curse that had befallen the family. Declan O'Connell stood stoically throughout the service, his face a mask of grief and resolve, while Liam stood by Seamus, who seemed on the verge of collapse, his poetic composure shattered by his brother's passing. Seamus, however, was not just grieving, he was obsessed. He locked himself away in the family's vast library, poring over ancient texts and corresponding with folklorists across Ireland. The library was a trove of knowledge accumulated by generations of O'Connells. 2 stories of towering oak bookshelves were filled with leather-bound books, handwritten manuscripts, and vellum scrolls collected from far and wide. A wrought-iron spiral staircase connected the 2 floors, and tall, arched windows allowed natural light to flood the space during the day. At night, Seamus worked by the flickering light of dozens of candles, wax dripping onto priceless books as he lost himself in his desperate research. "Who is Brigid?" Liam asked him one evening, finding his brother surrounded by open tomes and guttering candles, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. The once romantic poet now looked like a ghost, his clothes rumpled, his black hair a mess, and his eyes sunken in dark circles. The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge and order, was now chaotic, with books piled everywhere and pages of Seamus's increasingly illegible handwriting pinned to the walls and covering the furniture. "That's what I'm trying to find out," Seamus replied, his eyes not leaving the yellowed vellum before him. His voice had an edge Liam had never heard before, a near maniacal tension that vibrated with suppressed energy. "No one in our family or among our acquaintances bears that name. Cillian had no lover, no friends named Brigid. It's as if the name came from nowhere." He looked up suddenly, his deep-set eyes boring into Liam's, a look that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone, or perhaps, from somewhere else entirely, Perhaps it was just the meaningless rambling of a mind in the throes of a fever, Liam suggested, but Seamus shook his head violently, sending loose papers fluttering to the floor. Liam noticed that many of them were variations of the symbol Cillian had copied. Some were exact replicas, others had details added or altered, as if Seamus were experimenting with it. I believe it's connected to the symbol he found. I've found references to ancient rites that worshipped a being they called Aron, Lord of the Otherworld. He exists in a realm beyond our comprehension and can only touch this world at sacred places, like the mound on our land. Seamus's hand trembled as he picked up a tattered, leather-bound book that looked particularly ancient. This manuscript, supposedly from the 10th century, describes similar signs found at sacred sites all over Ireland, always near mounds or stone circles, always hidden from common view. They're described as seals, locks, to keep the veil between worlds intact. If broken or copied incorrectly, his voice dropped and he swallowed hard before continuing. The consequences are catastrophic. Liam gave a strained laugh. You can't possibly believe this superstitious nonsense, Seamus. We live in the 19th century, an age of reason and progress. He pointed to a book on steam engines lying discarded on the floor. Even the power of steam is explained by science. Surely you don't think some old legend. There are truths older than your science, Liam, Seamus replied gravely. Truths the human mind was not made to comprehend. I've been having dreams, Liam, dreams of a woman in a white cloak. She stands at the foot of my bed, calling my name, and sometimes her face changes into something else, something I cannot describe, except to say that in seeing it, I know what awaits us after death, and it is not peace. Years passed. The tragedy of Cillian's death faded from daily conversation, though it left a cold shadow over Glenmore Castle that never truly lifted. The servants mumbled prayers whenever they passed Cillian's old room, which had been locked by Declan's order. The fairy mound became a forbidden zone, with Declan threatening to fire any servant who dared venture near it. Liam immersed himself in the family business, finding solace in ledgers and contracts, where the world followed clear, logical rules. Seamus continued his research, growing ever more reclusive. He took his meals alone in the library, rarely speaking to anyone but the couriers who brought him rare books, and was sometimes heard muttering to himself in Old Irish, a language few in the household still understood. The only person he allowed into his sanctuary was Mrs. O'Malley, the old housekeeper, a kind but stern woman who had served the O'Connells since she was a girl. She reported to Declan that young Master Seamus had begun covering the mirrors in the library with black cloth and worked only by candlelight, even during the day. On the night of the spring equinox in 1835, the entire castle was awakened by blood-curdling screams from Seamus's room. There was no rain that night, only a strong wind that moaned through the turrets, carrying the mournful sound of the hills. Seamus's screams began suddenly, high-pitched and desperate, seeming to battle the shrieking of the wind. Servants and family members rushed to his room, only to find him standing in the middle of his bedchamber, his eyes fixed on an unseen, dark corner. The room was in utter chaos. Furniture was overturned, bed sheets were torn to shreds, and most disturbingly, every reflective surface had been smashed. The mirror on his writing desk was a glittering pile of shards on the floor. The brass candlesticks were bent and twisted as if by a superhuman force, and even the glass pane of the window had been broken from the inside, letting in the cold wind that sent papers flying. The walls of his room were covered in charcoal drawings of the same symbol Cillian had discovered, interspersed with lines of script in an ancient language no one recognized. Every available surface had been used: the stone walls, the wooden furniture, and even the ceiling directly above his bed. The drawings were slightly different, as if Seamus had been experimenting with variations of the symbol, trying to find some perfect configuration. And in the very center of the room, drawn in what looked like blood on the stone floor, was the largest version of the symbol, with Seamus standing in its heart like a sacrifice awaiting the blade. "It's her!" Seamus screamed, pointing to the empty corner. His nightshirt was tattered and stained with blood, his bare feet covered in cuts from the broken glass. Yet, he seemed to feel no pain. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his pupils so dilated they nearly eclipsed the irises. "She's come for me. Can't you see her? Can't you see her true form?" His voice rose to a shrill, almost inhuman pitch. "Her face, by the saints, that is not a face. Declan tried to restrain his son, but Seamus's strength was suddenly phenomenal. He shoved his father with such force that Declan stumbled into a bookshelf, sending it crashing down and nearly crushing him. The servants fared no better. One was knocked to the ground, another thrown against the wall with such force that the stone plaster cracked. Only Liam, with his determination and strong build, managed to get a hold of his brother's arm. Seamus began to claw at his own eyes. "I will not look. I will not see," he shrieked, his nails digging bloody furrows into his cheeks. "Take back what is yours. Leave me what is mine." And then, just as Cillian had done, he began to scream the name, Brigid, Brigid. The name seemed to resonate with a strange power, as if the very stone walls of the castle were amplifying it, sending it out to join the wailing wind on the hills. It took 4 strong men to subdue him. The steward, Mr. O'Malley, brought ropes, and they bound Seamus to his bed, the only thing still standing in the chaos. Dr. Fitzwilliam was summoned from the nearby village, arriving haggard, his medical bag clutched to his chest. He administered a sedative, but it seemed to have no effect. A stronger dose finally weakened Seamus's struggles, though his eyes remained wide open, fixed on horrors only he could see. For 3 days, Seamus was bound to the bed, alternating between catatonic states and fits of screaming the name. The family moved him to another room, one not covered in the terrifying symbols, but this seemed to agitate him further. Declan ordered the original bedroom to be sealed, the door nailed shut and then covered with a large wall tapestry. "No one is to enter that room again," he commanded, his voice brittle, "and no one is to speak of what they saw there." On the 3rd night, during a rare moment of lucidity, he begged Liam to destroy all his research. The wind had died down, and a silver moon shone through the window of the room where Seamus lay. His bonds had been loosened so he could take some thin broth, though a burly servant stood by, ready to tighten them at the first sign of trouble. Liam sat by the bed, his own face exhausted from 3 sleepless nights. "Burn it all, Liam," Seamus pleaded, his voice a raw whisper from the screaming. The romantic poet was now just a broken shell, his face scratched, his black hair matted, his body rail-thin despite their attempts to care for him. "Burn it all, and never speak of what I found. It's the only way you can save yourself." He gripped Liam's hand with surprising strength, pulling him closer. "She is one of us, Liam. An O'Connell. That's why she can find us. That's why she hates us. We brought this upon ourselves." Before Liam could reply, Seamus's body went rigid. His back arched so violently that only his heels and the back of his head touched the bed. A strange sound came from his throat, not a scream this time, but a wet, gurgling rattle that sent a chill down Liam's spine. His eyes rolled back in his head, showing only the whites, and with a final utterance of Brigid, he died, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror. Liam, now the sole remaining son, carried out his brother's last wish. He gathered all of Seamus's papers and books, brought them to the great hearth in the library, and burned them. The task took 3 full days, so vast was Seamus's collection. Liam worked mechanically, tossing book after book, page after page, into the flames, watching ancient knowledge and horrifying legends turn to ash. A few of the books seemed to resist the fire, their vellum pages curling and blackening but not burning, forcing Liam to tear them apart with iron tongs. Others erupted in strangely colored flames, green, blue, and even a somber purple that cast eerie shadows throughout the library. When the last page turned to ash, Liam felt a cold draft sweep through the room, though all the windows were closed. The draft carried a scent he couldn't place, something ancient and slightly sweet, like the smell of heather pressed in a book for centuries. For a fleeting moment, he thought he heard the distant but clear sound of a woman's soft laughter echoing from somewhere above. He looked up, but saw only the silent, oaken ceiling of the library. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered until he hurried from the room, locking the door firmly behind him. Declan O'Connell, having lost 2 sons in such a tragic manner, became a broken man. His authority and resolve vanished, replaced by grief and fear. His health declined rapidly, and by 1840 he too had passed away. Mercifully, his end was peaceful, untroubled by the terror that had claimed his sons. Liam inherited Glenmore Castle and the entire Whiskey Empire. Determined to escape the shadow of the tragedy, he threw himself into his work, expanding the O'Connell business throughout Ireland and into England. In 1841, he married Eleanor Fitzwilliam, the daughter of a wealthy landowner, and in time they had a son, Rory. For years, life at Glenmore Castle seemed to return to normal. Liam never spoke of his brother's strange deaths, and gradually the horrific events began to feel like a distant nightmare. The fairy mound was fenced off, and Liam forbade anyone from going near it. But the curse in the shadow of Tara was only sleeping, not broken. In the early months of 1860, nearing the spring equinox, Liam began to complain of strange dreams. In these nightmares, he found himself standing atop the fairy mound, though he hadn't been there in over 20 years. A woman in a white cloak would step out of the mist, her face always obscured, and call his name. "Who are you?" he would ask in the dream. "Don't you remember?" The woman would reply, her voice like the wind whistling through stone cracks. "I am Bridget." Liam never told his wife about the dreams, fearing they were the first sign that whatever had taken his brothers was now coming for him. Instead, he traveled to Dublin, consulting the best physicians, who diagnosed him with nervous exhaustion and prescribed various tonics. But nothing worked. The dreams grew more vivid and terrifying. Now, the woman in the dream would come closer each night, and Liam could see that her clothes were from a bygone era, perhaps the previous century. Her face, however, remained in shadow, though he sometimes caught a glimpse of deathly pale skin and eyes that reflected no light. One night, as Liam sat alone in his study reviewing ledgers, he heard a soft tapping on the glass pane of the window that overlooked the gardens. He looked up, but saw only his own reflection in the dark glass. Then, slowly, another face materialized behind his. A woman's face, with a sorrowful beauty that was terrifying in its spectral stillness. "Bridget," Liam whispered, the name escaping his lips before he could stop it. The face smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were empty, like two deep, dark pits. Liam recoiled in horror, knocking over his chair in his haste. When he looked again, the face was gone. The next day, Liam called his son Rory, now a young man of 18, into his study. Without explanation, he made his son swear a solemn oath, never to speak or write the name Bridget. He was to leave for university in Dublin immediately and was forbidden to return until Liam sent for him. "Father, what is happening?" Rory asked, confused. "Who is Bridget?" Liam struck his son across the face, the first and only time he ever laid a hand on him. "Never speak that name again," he roared, his face contorted in fear. "Swear to me now that you will never utter it." Shocked by his father's behavior, Rory took the oath. He left for Dublin the next day, escorted by a trusted servant with instructions not to return until summoned. Alone with his wife at Glenmore Castle, Liam grew increasingly paranoid. He ordered all mirrors in the house to be covered after sunset, every window to be shuttered regardless of the weather, and no one was to go near the fairy mound. Eleanor, worried for her husband's sanity, secretly wrote to her son, telling him of his father's deteriorating state. She also sought help from priests and doctors, but no one could explain Liam's behavior or offer a cure. On the night of the spring equinox, 1860, Liam locked himself in his study. He had spent the preceding weeks studying the old books of Seamuses that he had kept, believing he had found a pattern to the curse that had taken his brothers. That night, the servants reported hearing Liam engaged in a fierce argument, though everyone knew he was alone in the room. His voice, both angry and desperate, echoed through the cold stone corridors of the castle. Then, suddenly, the screaming began, the same horrific scream that had heralded the deaths of Shelian and Seamus. "Bridget! Bridget! Bridget!" When Eleanor and the servants broke down the oaken door, Liam O'Connell was dead. His body was contorted in agony, his eyes wide with the same terror that had marked his brother's final moments. In his rigid hand was a shattered whiskey bottle, blood and spirits pooling on the floor, and on the opposite wall, drawn in what appeared to be his own blood, was the symbol of a Rawn's eye that Cillian had discovered 50 years earlier. Rory O'Connell returned from Dublin for his father's funeral. Despite his mother's pleas, the young man felt it was his duty to understand what had driven his father to madness and death. Rory, now the new master of the O'Connell estate, collected all of his father's papers and books. Among them, he found a small, secret journal Liam had kept, detailing his fears and his research into the family curse. The journal contained references to an ancestor named Bridget O'Connell, who had lived at the castle in the early 1700s. She had been executed for treason after a rival distillery suddenly acquired the O'Connell's secret whiskey formula. According to local legends recorded in the journal, Bridget had cursed the O'Connell men from the gallows, vowing to haunt them one by one until the line was extinguished. Liam had discovered that each O'Connell death had occurred exactly 25 years apart, always on the spring equinox. "It's all folklore," a university friend of Rory's said when he shared his father's findings. "Fairy tales and superstition. Your father was ill, just as your uncles were. There's likely a hereditary madness in the O'Connell blood." "Then why did they all die screaming the same name?" Rory asked, his voice haunted. A name they had no reason to know. Rory had no more desire to argue. He decided to abandon Glenmore Castle. He sold off most of the land to local tenant farmers, keeping only the castle and its immediate grounds, leaving it in the care of a steward. He moved to Dublin, hoping the bustling city life could help him forget his family's tragedy. For a time, it seemed the curse could be broken by distance. Rory married and had a son, Finian. He became a successful merchant, trading the family whiskey across the British Empire. He never spoke of the curse and avoided anyone who mentioned the name that had heralded the death of his father and uncles. The curse, however, was patient. On the spring equinox of 1885, exactly 25 years after Liam's death, Rory O'Connell was sitting in a bustling Dublin pub. As he prepared to leave, he felt a strange sensation of being watched. Standing in a dark corner of the pub was a woman in the dress of the previous century, her face obscured by a hood. "Can I help you, madam?" Rory asked, a businessman's confidence overriding his fleeting unease. The woman slowly raised her head, and the blood in Rory's veins turned to ice. Her face was not a face, but a void, a darkness deeper than night, a negation of reality itself. Yet somehow, he knew she was smiling. "You don't recognize me, Rory?" she asked, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "I am family, after all." Rory staggered to his feet, trying to make for the door, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "I don't know you," he insisted, though in his heart he knew exactly who or what stood before him. "But you do," the figure replied, gliding closer without a sound. "Your father knew me, your uncles knew me, and now it is your turn to know me." Rory screamed and collapsed to the floor, to the horror of the pub's patrons. His last cry, before his heart stopped, was that same fateful name. The curse continued. Rory's son, Finian, died in 1910 while working on a ship bound for America. His grandson, Declan II, a folklorist, died in the library of Trinity College in 1935. All on the spring equinox, all dying while screaming the name Bridget. The curse played out through the generations. Declan II's son, Michael, died in 1960. He was a soldier in the UN peacekeeping force in the Congo. His comrades reported that in his final moments, after being struck by a stray bullet, he sat bolt upright, stared into space, and screamed an Irish woman's name they did not understand. Always 25 years apart, always on the spring equinox, always screaming the same name. Through the tumultuous 20th century, the curse claimed the O'Connell men with the precision of a fateful clock. Some tried to escape their destiny by changing their names, others turned to religion, and one even tried ancient rituals for protection. None succeeded. By 1975, only one direct descendant of the O'Connell line remained, but this time, it was not a man. It was Niamh O'Connell, an archaeologist working at a university in Boston. Unlike her ancestors, Niamh grew up with vague stories of the curse. Her mother, Siobhan, Michael O'Connell's daughter, had told her of the family tragedies, but always insisted they were just tragic coincidences or a hereditary heart condition. But before she died, Siobhan gave Niamh an old box containing the notes of her grandfather, Declan II. "Knowledge is power, my dear Niamh," she had told her. "I don't know if what's written in here is truth or the obsession of a frightened man, but perhaps if you understand what has plagued our family, you can find a way to ensure it never touches the generations to come." Niamh had spent years pursuing her career in archaeology, but her grandfather's notes planted a new obsession in her heart. She returned to Ireland, visiting the site where Glenmore Castle once stood. The castle was now a ruin, but the fairy mound was still there, a silent green hill, now part of an archaeological preserve. She began to research Bridget O'Connell extensively. What she discovered horrified her. Historical records showed that Bridget O'Connell had indeed been executed for treason in 1720, but the charges against her had been fabricated. She was the wife of Cormac O'Connell, an ambitious man. Old documents, including letters and a servant's diary, revealed that Cormac had orchestrated the charges to eliminate Bridget, who had discovered his terrible secret. Bridget's last words, recorded in the annals of a local monastery, were, "I do not curse God, nor the soil of Ireland. I curse only the name of O'Connell and those who bear it. They shall see me in their final moments, and my name will be the last word on their lips." Niamh believed that understanding the source of the curse was the key to breaking it. She hypothesized that Bridget's spirit was not malevolent, but was seeking justice for the terrible wrong done to her. If she could atone for her ancestors' crime, perhaps the curse would be lifted. As the spring equinox of 1989, the 25th anniversary of her own father Connor's death, drew near, Niamh prepared herself. She went to the site where Bridget was executed, now a quiet crossroads in a small town. There, at dusk, she performed a ritual of her own making, combining elements of ancient Irish reconciliation traditions. "Bridget O'Connell," she whispered into the twilight, "I acknowledge the injustice done to you. I acknowledge the sin of my bloodline. The man who wronged you is long dead, as are those who abetted his crime. I do not ask for forgiveness, for that is yours alone to give. I ask only for an end to this cycle of vengeance. Please, let it end with me." Niamh felt a little foolish speaking these words alone, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt a shift in the air, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, in her small rented room, Niamh slept a deep and peaceful sleep for the first time in months. She did not dream of fairy mounds or women in white cloaks, but of fields of wildflowers and clear Irish skies. When she awoke, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps her efforts had worked. Her optimism was short-lived. As she stepped out of the bathroom, the old mirror in her room fogged over, not with steam, but with a spreading darkness from within. Slowly, a message appeared on its surface, written by an unseen finger. "Justice is not pity." Niamh left the small town the next day, returning to her rented flat in Dublin. As the equinox approached, she fortified her room with every protective measure she knew from her archaeological and folkloric studies. Circles of salt around the doors and windows, sprigs of rowan and mistletoe hung on the walls, and ancient Celtic symbols known for warding off spirits. On the morning of the spring equinox, Niamh called her sister, Deirdre, who lived in London. "Deirdre," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, "if anything happens to me tonight, there's a box in my wardrobe. The key is under the potted plant. Inside is everything I've found about our family history. Maybe someday it will be of use." "Niamh, what are you talking about?" "You're scaring me," Deirdre replied. "Why don't you get on a flight over here tonight? You and Éowyn can stay with me." Éowyn was Deirdre's 5-year-old son, the only remaining male descendant of the line. "No," Niamh said firmly. "Éowyn needs to be as far from Ireland as possible today. Promise me you'll take care of him, Deirdre." Deirdre promised, not fully understanding the gravity of her sister's words. Niamh spent the day in her room, reviewing Declan II's notes and her own findings one last time, searching for any clue she might have missed, any detail that could save her from her ancestors' fate. As the sun began to set, she felt the chillingly familiar sensation of being watched. The temperature in the room plummeted, her breath condensing into white puffs in the cold air. The protective sprigs she had hung on the walls began to wither and turn black as if scorched by an invisible heat. And then she was there, a woman in 18th century dress. Her face was no longer obscured in shadow. For the first time, Niamh saw her clearly, not a monster, not a demon, but a woman in her 40s, her face etched with suffering, and her eyes holding not hatred, but an endless sorrow. "Bridget," Niamh said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You know me," she replied, her voice an echo from the past. "None of them ever truly knew me. They only feared a name without understanding the pain behind it." "I know what happened to you," Niamh said. "The injustice, my ancestors' betrayal. I tried to find justice for you. The entity in Bridget's form drew closer, its form seeming to shimmer between solid and ethereal. Words cannot heal this wound, Niamh O'Connell. Justice demands balance. A wrong must be paid with a sorrow. Then take me, Niamh said, standing tall to face her. End it with me. My nephew, Rowan, he is innocent. He doesn't deserve this curse. The entity smiled, a sad smile devoid of any joy. He is innocent, yes, as was I. She reached out a hand, her translucent fingers stopping just short of Niamh's cheek. But the curse cannot end until the seal is made whole. How? Niamh asked desperately. Tell me what I have to do, please. For a moment, it seemed the entity of Bridget might answer. Her expression softened, and Niamh felt a fragile spark of hope. Then her form began to shift, her face elongated, her skin darkened to the grey of mossy stone. Her eyes sank deep into their sockets, then disappeared entirely, leaving two empty voids that seemed to suck the very light from the room. Niamh tried to step back, but her feet were frozen to the floor. She felt cold fingers touch her temples, not to harm, but to hold her in place as the thing that was once Bridget bent down and whispered in her ear. What it told her in that moment, no one will ever know. But the neighbors later reported hearing Niamh O'Connell's screams echoing through the quiet neighborhood. A scream of ultimate terror, followed by a name repeated over and over until her voice gave out. Bridget, Bridget, Bridget. Niamh O'Connell was found by the police the next morning, after a frantic Deirdre called them. Unable to reach her sister, her body lay in the middle of the room, eyes wide, her face frozen in an expression of horror. The coroner ruled the cause of death was acute cardiac failure, likely brought on by extreme stress. The box Niamh left for Deirdre contained hundreds of pages of research, historical documents, genealogical records, and Niamh's own theories on the curse. Deirdre read it all, then locked the box away, determined that her son, Rowan, would never know the fate that might await him. Eoin grew up unaware of his family's dark legacy. Deirdre changed his surname to her husband's, and they moved to Canada. She never told Rowan about the curse, convincing herself that what happened to the O'Connell men was just a series of tragedies, a rare genetic flaw, not a supernatural feud from beyond the grave. For years, it seemed her precautions had worked. Eowyn graduated, became an architect, and started a family. Deirdre began to believe that perhaps the curse had died with Niamh, that her son was truly free. Then the letter arrived. It was delivered to Rowan's office on his 30th birthday. The envelope was old, with no return address, the handwriting elegant but firm. Inside was a single piece of vellum with a short message. The curse does not forget, even when the name is changed. Spring Equinox 2014. She will come for you as she came for all the others, but you alone have the power to end it. Your aunt found the truth but lacked the final piece. In her notes is your salvation. Find it, understand it, and finish what she started. The letter was signed simply, a friend of the O'Connells. Eowyn took the letter to his mother, demanding an explanation. Deirdre tried to dismiss it as a sick joke, but Eowyn saw the familiar fear in her eyes. He pressed her until she, in tears, finally revealed everything. The curse, his true family name, the fate that had befallen his Aunt Niamh, and all the O'Connell men before her. Where are Aunt Niamh's notes? Eowyn asked when she had finished the story. The box she left, where is it now? I burned it, Deirdre lied, unable to bear the thought of her son going down the same path that had destroyed her family. There was nothing useful in there, Rowan, just the obsessions of a woman who let fairy tales drive her mad. Eowyn didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he began his own investigation. Starting with the O'Connell name, he traced his way back to Ireland, discovering distant relatives, descendants of O'Connell daughters who had married and changed their names, thus escaping the curse. Through them, he pieced together the family history and confirmed nearly everything his mother had told him. As the months passed, Eowyn became convinced the curse was real and that he was its next target. He began to suffer from insomnia, spending his nights reading about Irish folklore and methods of protection against spirits. His wife, Claire, initially sympathetic, grew worried as Eowyn's behavior became more erratic. Their marriage began to fracture under the weight of his obsession. When Claire discovered she was pregnant, she gave Rowan an ultimatum: seek professional help or she would leave to raise their child alone. The prospect of fatherhood pulled Royan back from the brink of panic. He agreed to see a therapist and take medication for severe anxiety. For a while, it seemed to work. He stopped his research, focused on his architectural work, and prepared for the birth of his child. Then the dreams began. Every night, Rowan found himself standing on a green mound under the moonlight. A woman in a white cloak would step out of the mist, calling his name. As the dreams continued, she came closer, and he began to see her face, a face that was both sorrowful and held a terrifying purpose. Éowyn kept the dream secret from both Claire and his doctor, afraid they would think him psychotic and have him committed. Instead, he resumed his search for his aunt's notes. Convinced they held the key to his survival, he confronted his mother again, this time with the urgency of a man who knew his time was running out. Deirdre, seeing the exhaustion and fear in her son's eyes, finally relented. She produced an old key from her jewelry box and gave it to Royan. "I couldn't destroy it," she admitted. "No matter what, I couldn't bring myself to erase my sister's last work. But Éowyn, promise me you won't let it consume you like it did Niamh." Éowyn promised, though he knew it was a promise he would struggle to keep. The old box contained exactly what Niamh had left. Hundreds of pages of research, historical documents, and a personal journal chronicling the O'Connell curse through the generations. Éowyn took it all home and began to read, searching for the truth his aunt had found, but which lacked the final piece, as the mysterious letter had said. As he delved deeper into the notes, Éowyn began to understand. The curse wasn't simply vengeance for Brigid's unjust death. It was about a fundamental imbalance, a justice denied, and a hidden truth. His ancestor, Cormac O'Connell, who had framed his wife for execution, had done so not just to cover up an illegal business deal. He had done it to hide a far more terrible crime. Brigid had discovered that her husband was responsible for the deaths of several servants who had been sacrificed on the fairy mound in ancient rituals to secure wealth and business success. The fairy mound, where Cillian found the symbol centuries later, was Cormac's ritual site. The symbol was a seal, a lock to control the entity with which he had made a pact. When Cillian copied it, he had unwittingly weakened the seal, allowing the thing from the other world to once again reach into this one. But the entity that appeared as Brigid O'Connell was not really her. It was Aran, an ancient entity Cormac had bargained with, a thing that had co-opted Brigid's form and her grievance as a vessel to enter our world. Brigid O'Connell was truly innocent, but the thing seeking vengeance in her name was anything but. Niamh had discovered this truth. In her final notes, written on the day she died, she had outlined what she believed was the solution: to complete the seal. But she was apparently missing something, a crucial element she had not yet found. As the spring equinox of 2014 approached, Éowyn felt a mixture of terror and determination. Claire was now 8 months pregnant with their son, another O'Connell male who would inherit the curse if Éowyn failed. In the final days before the equinox, Éowyn returned to the Glenmore Castle site. The archaeological preserve was quiet, with no trace of the tragedy that had begun there centuries ago. Using Declan II's old maps and Niamh's notes, Rowan pinpointed the approximate location of the ancient oak on the fairy mound. There, in the pre-dawn light, he began to dig. A security guard discovered him and called the police, but not before Éowyn found what he was looking for: a small stone slab buried deep beneath the roots, bearing the symbol of Aron's eye. Éowyn was arrested for trespassing and destruction of a historical site. He spent the day in a police station, growing increasingly agitated as the equinox neared. By evening, Claire had arrived to bail him out, her face a mask of worry and disappointment. "You promised me, Éowyn," she said as they drove home. "You promised you would be okay." "I am getting better," Éowyn insisted. "I'm seeing things more clearly than ever. I know how to end this, Claire. I know how to protect our son." Claire didn't reply, but Rowan could see she was at her limit. When they got home, she told him she was going to stay with her parents until the baby was born. "I love you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I can't watch you destroy yourself like this. Get help, Éowyn. Real help." Left alone on the day of the spring equinox, Éowyn prepared for what was to come. His aunt's notes had helped him understand that the entity Aran could be resealed, not with futile appeasement rituals, but by completing the seal Cormac O'Connell had created and Cillian had unwittingly weakened. To do this, Éowyn needed the original stone. He had managed to hide it in his jacket before the police arrived. Now, he studied it carefully, comparing it to Neem's drawings. The symbol was incomplete. Eowyn suddenly realized what his aunt had likely missed. Cormac had intentionally left it unfinished as a failsafe, a way to control the thing he'd bargained with. The missing elements weren't on the stone. Niamh had believed they were on Cormac's signet ring, but she was wrong. Declan II's notes mentioned a detail. Cormac O'Connell was buried with a silver cross he always wore. Rowan believed the final piece was there. As night fell, Eowyn felt the familiar sensation of being watched. The temperature in his apartment dropped suddenly. The lights flickered and then died, leaving him in a darkness illuminated only by the candles he had lit. "I know you're here," Eowyn said into the void. "I know what you are. Not Bridget. Never Bridget. You just borrowed her face and her grievance." The shadows in the corner of the room coalesced, taking human form. The figure of a woman in 18th century dress stepped forward, her face shifting between that of a middle-aged woman and something else, ancient and hungry. "Clever boy," the entity said, its voice echoing as if from a great distance. "Cleverer than your aunt, cleverer than all the O'Connell men before you. My ancestor made a pact with you," Rowan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "He sacrificed innocent lives for wealth. When his wife found out, he had her executed to silence her and bound you with an incomplete seal. A seal your ancestor weakened when he copied my mark without understanding its purpose," the entity confirmed, drawing closer. Eowyn held up a sheet of paper on which he had redrawn the symbol from the stone and from images of the cross he'd found in church archives. "This is the true seal. The complete binding," the entity laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Almost complete. There is still one thing missing, the final element, and now, like all the O'Connell men before you, you will die screaming the name I have borrowed." "I know what the final element is," Eowyn said. "Aunt Niamh didn't realize it, but I do. The seal doesn't just need the symbol, it needs a sacrifice. The blood of O'Connell, the blood of the Pact Maker's line." To close the door, he opened. Before the entity could react, Rowan took a small knife and made a deep cut in the palm of his hand. Blood welled up, dripping onto the stone where he had completed the symbol. As his blood touched the stone, the entire symbol flared with an eerie green light. The entity shrieked, its form becoming unstable, flickering between Bridget's appearance and something else, a black fog of swirling eyes. "You cannot seal me," it howled. "You will die before your blood is enough to lock me away." Eowyn realized with horror that the entity was right. The seal was activating, but it required an amount of life force he couldn't provide quickly enough. The light began to dim. The entity lunged, its form elongating and distorting as it reached for Eowyn. He stumbled back, knocking over a small table, sending a candle toppling to the floor. In that desperate moment, a strange calm fell over Eowyn. He understood what Niamh had perhaps realized too late, what all the O'Connell men had glimpsed as they died. The curse couldn't be broken by a seal alone. The entity was too strong, its connection to the O'Connell blood too deep. There was only one way to end it forever. "I know your true name," Eowyn said, his voice suddenly strong. "Not Bridget. That name belongs to an innocent woman you defiled with your charade." The entity paused, its form rippling as if in hesitation. "Your true name is bound to my blood," Eowyn continued. "Bound by the pact my ancestor made, a name that can never be spoken by an O'Connell without summoning your full essence into this world. An essence this reality cannot contain." The entity's form began to shrink, to implode on itself as if trying to recoil. "You would not dare," it hissed. "To speak my true name will destroy you, as surely as it will banish me. To save my son, to end this curse forever," Eowyn replied. "I would dare anything." He took a deep breath and spoke a word, an ancient Irish word that the modern tongue could not properly pronounce, a word that seemed to make the very air around it ripple. Not Bridget, but something older, something that had dwelled in the darkness of the mounds long before recorded history. The entity let out a final scream as its form exploded, filling the room with an absolute darkness that swallowed the candlelight. Eowyn felt a crushing pressure in his mind, as if his soul were being torn apart, his vision shattered, and reality itself seemed to crack around him. With his last ounce of strength, with his final breath, Rowan repeated the entity's true name, not in fear or desperation, but as a judgment, a banishment, not a summons, a closing. not an opening. The darkness collapsed in on itself, with a sound like the earth swallowing itself, and then a complete and total silence. Éowyn was found by Claire when she returned the next day, frantic with worry after being unable to reach him. His body lay in the middle of the living room, surrounded by burnt-out candles and the now cold stone slab. Unlike the O'Connell men before him, his face was peaceful, free of the terror that had haunted them. The doctor concluded his death was from sudden cardiac arrest, likely brought on by prolonged stress. Claire was heartbroken, filled with regret for not being with him in his final hours. A month later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Niall, in honor of the courage of his great-aunt Niamh and the sacrifice of his father. As the years passed, she watched her son carefully, searching for any sign of the darkness that had plagued the O'Connell family. But Niall grew into a happy, vibrant boy, completely unaware of the curse that had haunted his ancestors. There were no nightmares of fairy mounds or women in white cloaks. No names whispered in the night. On Niall's 10th birthday, a small package arrived for Claire. It contained a single sheet of paper with a short message. "The curse in the shadow of Tara is broken. Your son is free." Rowan succeeded where all others failed, not with seals or appeasement, but with sacrifice and truth. The entity known as Bridget is gone, banished back to the netherworld where it belongs. The name Éowyn spoke with his final breath has been erased from this world, never to be repeated. The price was great, but the freedom he won is eternal. The letter was unsigned, but Claire knew it spoke the truth. That night, she told Niall the story of his father, not the story of a man consumed by obsession, but of a father who loved his unborn child so much he was willing to trade everything to protect him. And somewhere in the dark netherworld, an unseen entity howled in its prison, enraged but unable to return. The name it had used to enter our world was now forever tied to the sacrifice that had banished it. The O'Connell curse was truly broken. The cycle of death ended by the courage of one man who dared to face the final truth. The truth that sometimes, to save the ones you love, you must be willing to pay the ultimate price. Éowyn had been willing to pay it, and in doing so, had finally redeemed his family's legacy. So if you ever hear of a family curse, of men dying screaming a woman's name, remember the O'Connells. Remember that curses can be broken, that cycles can be ended, but only through understanding, sacrifice, and the courage to face the darkest truths of our own history. Because in the end, what we should fear is not vengeance from the other side, but the human capacity for evil that creates such curses in the first place. The true crime of Cormac O'Connell was not bargaining with an ancient entity, but sacrificing innocent lives for his own greed and persecuting an innocent woman to cover his sins. The entity may be banished, but the lesson remains. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Truths buried beneath the hills will eventually rise, and in confronting the darkest pages of our own history, we can find not just horror, but also salvation. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video.